The year was 1985, and the vast expanse of Wyoming's Wind River Valley stretched endlessly under a sky so wide it seemed to swallow the horizon whole. In this remote corner of America, where the nearest town was 40 miles of dusty road away and winter storms could isolate a ranch for weeks at a time, people learned to depend on themselves and the unwritten code of the frontier that said you never turned away someone in genuine need. Ranch foreman Lucas Bennett had spent the better part of 15 years working cattle operations throughout the American West, moving from job to job as the seasons and opportunities dictated. At 35, Lucas was a man who had grown comfortable with solitude, preferring the honest company of horses and cattle to the complications that seemed to follow human relationships wherever they took root. Lucas had been managing the Broken Arrow Ranch for 3 years, overseeing 8,000 acres of prime grazing land for an absentee owner who lived in Denver and visited maybe twice a year. The isolation suited Lucas perfectly. He had his work, his books, and the kind of peace that could only be found in places where the nearest neighbor was a day's ride away. But on a bitter February morning in 1985, Lucas's carefully ordered world would be turned upside down when a desperate young woman appeared at his door, carrying a baby and fleeing from circumstances that had left her with nowhere else to turn. The choice he made in that moment would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, responsibility, and the kind of man he wanted to be. What began as a simple act of human decency would evolve into something far more profound, a journey of healing and redemption that would transform not just Lucas's life, but the lives of 2 people who had been abandoned by everyone else in the world. Sometimes the greatest families are not born from blood, but forged in the crucible of shared hardship and unconditional love. Before we dive into this heartwarming story of unexpected family bonds, drop a comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. The desperate arrival. Lucas Bennett was breaking ice on the water troughs when he heard the sound of an engine struggling against the bitter Wyoming wind. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero during the night, and the old pickup truck that was making its way up his ranch road was clearly having trouble with the conditions. It was barely past dawn on a February morning that promised to be one of the coldest of the winter, with snow falling steadily and the kind of wind that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Lucas paused in his work, watching as the battered truck lurched and slid its way toward the ranch house, black smoke pouring from its exhaust pipe. The truck finally came to a stop about 50 yards from the house, its engine coughing and dying with a sound that suggested it would never start again. For a moment, nothing happened, and Lucas began to wonder if the driver had passed out from carbon monoxide poisoning or hypothermia. Then the driver's door opened, and a young woman stumbled out into the snow, carrying what appeared to be a bundle of blankets in her arms. She was probably in her early 20s, with long brown hair and the kind of thin frame that suggested she hadn't been eating regularly. Her clothes were inadequate for the weather, and Lucas could see that she was shivering violently as she struggled through the deep snow toward his house. "Help me," she called out, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Please, sir, I have no one else. My baby is sick, and I don't know what to do." Lucas immediately dropped his tools and ran toward the woman, recognizing the desperation in her voice and the way she was clutching the bundle in her arms. As he got closer, he could see that she was indeed carrying an infant, and that both mother and child were in serious danger from the cold. "Get inside," Lucas said, taking the woman's arm and helping her toward the house. "We need to get you both warmed up before you freeze to death." The woman, who introduced herself as Rebecca Martinez, allowed Lucas to help her into the ranch house, where the warmth from the wood stove immediately began to thaw the ice that had formed on her clothes and hair. Lucas could see that she was exhausted and malnourished, and that the baby she was carrying was listless and pale. "How long have you been driving in this weather?" Lucas asked as he helped Rebecca remove her wet coat and settled her near the stove. "Since yesterday afternoon," Rebecca replied, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely speak. My car broke down about 10 miles from here, and I walked the rest of the way carrying Maria. I saw your lights and thought maybe you could help us." Lucas looked at the baby, who couldn't have been more than 6 months old, and felt his heart sink. The infant was clearly suffering from exposure and dehydration, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Without immediate medical attention, the child might not survive. "We need to get your baby to a doctor," Lucas said. "But the nearest hospital is in Riverton, and with this storm the roads are probably impassable." Rebecca's face crumpled as she realized the gravity of their situation. "I don't have any money for a doctor," she said. "I spent everything I had on gas trying to get here. I heard there might be work on one of the ranches, but I don't even know if that's true." Lucas studied Rebecca's face, seeing the desperation of a mother who had exhausted every option and was facing the possibility of losing her child. He had seen that look before, during his own childhood, when his mother had struggled to keep their family together after his father had abandoned them. "Tell me what happened," Lucas said gently. "How did you end up driving through a blizzard with a sick baby?" Rebecca's story, told in halting sentences between tears, revealed a series of misfortunes that had left her with no resources and nowhere to turn. She had been living in Denver with the baby's father, a man named Tony, who had promised to marry her and help raise their daughter. But when Maria was born with health problems that required expensive medical care, Tony had disappeared, leaving Rebecca with mounting medical bills and no way to pay them. "I lost my job because I had to take so much time off to take Maria to doctors," Rebecca explained. "Then I got evicted from our apartment because I couldn't pay the rent. I've been living in my car for 2 weeks, trying to find work and keep Maria warm." Lucas listened with growing sympathy as Rebecca described her desperate journey across Colorado and Wyoming, following rumors of ranch work and seasonal employment that never materialized. She had been surviving on the few dollars she had managed to save, buying baby formula and gas while going without food herself. "I heard that some of the ranches up here hire people for winter work," Rebecca continued. "I know I don't look like much, but I'm a hard worker, and I'll do anything to take care of my daughter. I just need someone to give me a chance." Lucas looked at Rebecca and her baby, seeing the determination in the young mother's eyes despite her desperate circumstances. He had been in similar situations himself as a child, when his mother had been forced to rely on the kindness of strangers to keep their family together. "The first thing we need to do is get your baby some medical attention," Lucas said. "I've got a radio that can reach the emergency services in Riverton. Maybe they can send a helicopter or at least give us some medical advice." Rebecca grabbed Lucas's arm, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. "I can't pay you back right now," she said, "but I promise I will. I'll work for you for free if you'll just help my baby." Lucas spent the next hour on the radio, coordinating with emergency services and describing Maria's symptoms to a doctor in Riverton. The weather was too severe for a helicopter evacuation, but the doctor was able to provide instructions for treating the baby's dehydration and hypothermia using supplies that Lucas had on hand. Following the doctor's guidance, Lucas and Rebecca worked together to warm the baby gradually and get fluids into her system using a makeshift feeding setup. Slowly, Maria's color began to improve, and her breathing became more regular. "She's going to be okay," Lucas told Rebecca as they watched the baby's condition stabilize. "But she needs to stay warm and get regular feeding for the next few days. You can't travel in this weather anyway, so you might as well stay here until the storm passes." Rebecca looked at Lucas with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "I don't want to impose on you," she said. "You've already done more than anyone else would have." Lucas thought about his comfortable solitude and the complications that would come with having guests, especially a young mother and a sick baby. But as he looked at Rebecca's grateful face and the tiny infant who was finally sleeping peacefully, he knew he couldn't turn them away. "You're not imposing," Lucas said. "This ranch has plenty of room, and it gets pretty lonely out here during the winter. Besides, Maria needs time to recover, and you need time to figure out what you're going to do next." Rebecca began to cry, overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger who had no obligation to help her but had chosen to do so anyway. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved my baby's life." Lucas felt uncomfortable with Rebecca's gratitude, not because he didn't appreciate it, but because he wasn't used to being seen as someone's hero. He had always thought of himself as a loner who avoided getting involved in other people's problems. "Don't thank me yet," Lucas said. "Let's just focus on getting through this storm and making sure Maria stays healthy. We can worry about everything else later." As the wind howled outside and the snow continued to fall, Lucas realized that his quiet life as a Wyoming ranch foreman was about to become much more complicated. But as he watched Rebecca holding her baby close to the warmth of the stove, he found that he didn't mind the complications as much as he had expected. For the first time in years, the Broken Arrow Ranch didn't feel quite so empty. Building trust. The storm lasted for 3 days, during which time Lucas found himself sharing his home with 2 people who desperately needed his help. Rebecca proved to be everything she had claimed, a hard worker who insisted on earning her keep despite her circumstances and her baby's needs. Even while caring for Maria, Rebecca managed to help with cooking, cleaning, and the indoor tasks that kept a ranch running during winter weather. She had a natural competence that suggested she had been taking care of herself and others for most of her life, and Lucas found himself impressed by her resilience and determination. "You don't have to do all this," Lucas told Rebecca as she prepared breakfast on their second morning together. "You're a guest here, and your baby needs your attention." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "I'm not a guest," she said. "I'm someone who needed help, and you gave it to me. The least I can do is make myself useful while I'm here." Lucas had to admit that having help around the house was pleasant, even if he wasn't used to sharing his space with other people. Rebecca was quiet and respectful, and she seemed to understand his need for solitude without taking it personally. More importantly, Maria was recovering well from her ordeal. The baby was eating regularly and had regained the healthy color that had been missing when Rebecca first arrived. Lucas found himself surprisingly interested in the infant's progress, checking on her frequently and even helping with feeding when Rebecca needed to rest. "You're good with her," Rebecca observed, as Lucas held Maria while she prepared the baby's bottle. "Do you have children of your own?" Lucas shook his head. "Never been married," he said. "Never really thought about having kids. I guess I always figured I wasn't the family type." Rebecca studied Lucas's face as he gently rocked the baby, noting the careful way he supported Maria's head and the soft expression that came over his features when he looked at her. "You seem pretty natural at it to me," she said. The conversation made Lucas uncomfortable, not because he didn't enjoy caring for Maria, but because it forced him to confront feelings he had been avoiding for most of his adult life. He had always told himself that he preferred solitude, but the truth was that he had been afraid of the kind of vulnerability that came with caring about other people. On the 3rd day, when the storm finally broke and the roads became passable again, Lucas found himself reluctant to discuss Rebecca's departure. He'd grown accustomed to having company, and the thought of returning to his solitary existence seemed less appealing than it had a week earlier. "I suppose you'll be wanting to move on now that the weather's cleared," Lucas said, as they sat by the fire after dinner. Rebecca looked down at Maria, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I don't really have anywhere to go," she admitted. "I was hoping to find work somewhere in this area, but I don't know if anyone would hire someone with a baby." Lucas had been thinking about Rebecca's situation, and he had an idea that might benefit both of them. The Broken Arrow Ranch was large enough to justify hiring additional help, especially during the busy seasons, and Rebecca had already proven that she was capable and reliable. "Oh, what if you stayed here?" Lucas asked. "I could use help around the ranch, especially when calving season starts in a few weeks. The pay wouldn't be much, but there's a small cabin about a quarter-mile from the main house that you and Maria could use." Rebecca's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "You would do that for us?" she asked. "Even though you barely know me?" Lucas thought about his answer carefully. The truth was that he did know Rebecca, at least well enough to recognize her character and her determination to provide for her daughter. More importantly, he had come to care about what happened to her and Maria, even though he wasn't entirely comfortable admitting it to himself. "I know enough," Lucas said. "I know you're a hard worker, and I know you're a good mother. That's more than I can say for most of the seasonal help I've hired over the years." Rebecca began to cry, overwhelmed by the offer of stability and security that she had been desperately seeking. "I promise you won't regret this," she said. "I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired, and I'll make sure Maria doesn't interfere with the ranch operations." Lucas felt uncomfortable with Rebecca's emotional response, but he was also touched by her gratitude. "Maria's not a problem," he said. "Babies belong wherever their mothers are, and this ranch has plenty of room for both of you." Over the following weeks, Lucas helped Rebecca settle into the small cabin that would serve as her home. The building had been used to house seasonal workers in the past, and it was comfortable and well-maintained, with a wood stove for heat and basic furnishings that Rebecca supplemented with items from town. The arrangement worked better than Lucas had expected. Rebecca proved to be an invaluable assistant, helping with everything from bookkeeping to equipment maintenance. She had a quick mind and a willingness to learn that made her useful in ways that went far beyond the manual labor he had initially envisioned. More surprisingly, Lucas found that he enjoyed having Maria around the ranch. The baby was developing a personality, smiling and laughing when she saw him, and he discovered that he looked forward to the times when Rebecca would bring her to the main house for visits. "She likes you," Rebecca observed one evening, as Maria reached for Lucas with obvious delight. "I think you remind her of her grandfather, if she had one." "Daddy," the comment made Lucas think about his own childhood and the father who had abandoned his family when Lucas was barely older than Maria. He had spent most of his adult life avoiding the kind of emotional connections that could lead to disappointment and abandonment, but he was finding it impossible to maintain that distance with Rebecca and her daughter. "What happened to your family?" Rebecca asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You never talk about them." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to reveal about his past. "My father left when I was 7, he said finally. "My mother did her best to raise me and my sister alone, but it was hard. We moved around a lot, always looking for work and a place to belong." Rebecca nodded, understanding the pain behind Lucas's simple words. "That's why you became a ranch foreman," she said. "You learned to be self-sufficient because you couldn't count on anyone else." Lucas was surprised by Rebecca's insight, but he recognized the truth in her observation. "Something like that," he agreed. "I figured if I didn't depend on anyone, I couldn't be disappointed when they left." Rebecca looked at Lucas with compassion, seeing the lonely child he had been and understanding the walls he had built around himself as an adult. "Not everyone leaves," she said quietly. "Some people stay, especially when they find something worth staying for." "Adige." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship as Lucas began to open up about his past and his fears about the future. Rebecca, in turn, shared more about her own struggles and her dreams for Maria's future. As spring approached and calving season began, Lucas found himself working closely with Rebecca in ways that felt natural and comfortable. She had a gift for handling the cattle and an intuitive understanding of ranch operations that made her an ideal partner in the demanding work of managing a large operation. But more than that, Lucas was discovering that he enjoyed having people to care about, and who cared about him in return. For the first time in his adult life, he was part of something that felt like a family, even if it wasn't a traditional one. The realization both thrilled and terrified him, as he struggled with the fear that this happiness might be temporary, and that Rebecca and Maria might eventually leave him, just as his father had left his family years earlier. The challenge. Spring brought new challenges to the Broken Arrow Ranch as calving season arrived with its demands for round-the-clock vigilance and care. Lucas and Rebecca worked together seamlessly, taking shifts to monitor the pregnant cows and assist with difficult births when necessary. Rebecca proved to be a natural at the work, showing an intuitive understanding of animal behavior and a calm competence during emergencies that impressed Lucas. She was able to handle Maria's needs while still contributing meaningfully to the ranch operations, often carrying the baby with her as she checked on the cattle. "You've got a real gift for this work," Lucas told Rebecca after she had successfully assisted with a particularly difficult birth. "I've worked with a lot of ranch hands over the years, and most of them don't have your instincts." Rebecca smiled at the compliment, but Lucas could see that she was troubled by something. Over the past few weeks, she had seemed increasingly anxious, often checking the mail with an expression of worry that she tried to hide from him. "Is everything okay?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day of work. "You seem like something's bothering you." Rebecca hesitated, clearly reluctant to burden Lucas with her problems. "It's probably nothing," she said. "Just some legal issues from Denver that I thought were resolved." Lucas waited patiently, recognizing that Rebecca would tell him more when she was ready. He had learned that pushing her for information only made her withdraw, and he respected her need to process her problems in her own way. "Tony is trying to get custody of Maria," Rebecca said finally. "He's claiming that I'm an unfit mother because I don't have a permanent address or a steady income. His lawyer sent papers saying he wants to take her away from me." Lucas felt a surge of anger at the thought of someone trying to separate Rebecca from her daughter. He had seen how devoted she was to Maria, and he knew that the baby's father had abandoned them when they needed him most. What kind of man abandons his child and then tries to take her away from the mother who's been caring for her? Lucas asked. Rebecca's face darkened as she explained the situation. "Tony's family has money, and they think they can provide better for Maria than I can. They're claiming that I'm homeless and unemployed, and that Maria would be better off with them." Lucas realized that Rebecca's employment at the ranch might not be enough to satisfy a family court, especially if Tony's family had the resources to hire expensive lawyers. The informal arrangement they had developed might not look like stable employment to a judge who didn't understand the realities of ranch life. "What do you need to fight this?" Lucas asked. Rebecca shook her head sadly. "A real job with benefits, a permanent address, and enough money to hire a lawyer who can compete with Tony's family attorneys. None of which I have." Lucas thought about the problem for several minutes, considering options that might help Rebecca strengthen her position in the custody battle. Finally, he had an idea that might solve several problems at once. "What if we made this arrangement more official?" Lucas suggested. "I could put you on the ranch payroll as assistant manager with a salary and benefits. That would give you the kind of employment record that a court would respect." Rebecca looked at Lucas with surprise and gratitude. "You would do that for me?" she asked, "even though it might complicate things for you with taxes and paperwork?" Lucas nodded. "You've earned it," he said. "You're already doing the work of an assistant manager, and the ranch runs better with you here. Making it official just recognizes what's already true." But even as Lucas made the offer, he realized that it might not be enough to satisfy a family court. Tony's family could still argue that ranch work was unstable and that Maria would be better off in a city environment with access to better schools and medical care. "There's something else we could do," Lucas said, though the words felt strange coming out of his mouth. "We could get married." Rebecca stared at Lucas in shock, clearly not expecting such a proposal. "You don't mean that," she said. "You're just trying to help me, but you don't have to sacrifice your whole life for us." Lucas considered his words carefully, knowing that what he said next would change everything between them. "It wouldn't be a sacrifice," he said. "I care about you and Maria, and I want you to stay. Maybe this isn't the most romantic proposal in the world, but it's honest." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, studying Lucas's face and trying to understand what he was really offering. "You're talking about a marriage of convenience," she said. "Something to help me keep Maria, but not a real marriage." Lucas felt his heart racing as he realized that he wanted more than just a marriage of convenience, but he wasn't sure how to express feelings that he had never allowed himself to acknowledge before. "It could be real if we wanted it to be," Lucas said quietly. "I know I'm not much of a catch, just a ranch foreman with no family and not much money. But I love Maria like she was my own daughter, and I—" He paused, struggling with words he had never said to anyone. "I love you too, Rebecca. I didn't plan for it to happen, but it did." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she heard Lucas's confession. "I love you too," she said. "I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want you to think I was trying to take advantage of your kindness." Lucas reached for Rebecca's hand, feeling a sense of completeness that he had never experienced before. "So we'll do this together," he said. "We'll fight for Maria and we'll build something real here on this ranch." Rebecca nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her life from desperate uncertainty to the promise of a real family. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Once we're married, there's no going back to the way things were." Lucas looked at Rebecca and then at Maria, who was sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, and he knew that he had never been more certain of anything in his life. "I don't want to go back," he said. "For the first time in my life, I have something worth fighting for. The family." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Riverton, with Agent Walsh serving as Rebecca's maid of honor and the local sheriff, who had become a friend to Lucas over the years, serving as his best man. It was a simple ceremony, but it was filled with genuine emotion as Lucas and Rebecca exchanged vows that represented not just legal convenience, but real commitment to each other and to Maria. "I promise to love and protect you and Maria for as long as I live," Lucas said, as he placed the ring on Rebecca's finger. "You've given me something I never thought I could have, a real family." Rebecca's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to stand by you through whatever challenges we face," she said. "You saved us when we had nowhere else to turn, and now we'll build something beautiful together." The custody hearing took place 2 months later, with Tony's family presenting their case for why Maria would be better off with them. They had hired expensive lawyers and had prepared detailed arguments about the advantages of city life and their superior financial resources. But Lucas and Rebecca were prepared as well. They presented evidence of Rebecca's stable employment, their marriage certificate, and testimony from neighbors and community members who could attest to the loving home they had created for Maria. "Your Honor," Rebecca's lawyer argued, "Maria is thriving in her current environment. She has 2 parents who love her, a stable home, and a community that supports her family. Mr. Martinez abandoned this child when she needed him most, and now he wants to disrupt her life for his own convenience." The judge, a woman who had seen many custody cases over the years, was clearly impressed by the evidence of Maria's well-being and the obvious love that Lucas and Rebecca had for the child. "It's clear to this court that Maria is in a loving and stable home," the judge ruled. "Mr. Martinez's petition for custody is denied, and full legal custody is awarded to Rebecca and Lucas Bennett." The victory was more than just a legal win. It was validation of the family they had built together and confirmation that their love was strong enough to overcome any challenge. Lucas formally adopted Maria 6 months later, giving her his name and making their family legally complete. The adoption ceremony was held in the same courthouse where they had won the custody battle, and Lucas felt overwhelmed with emotion as he signed the papers that made him Maria's legal father. "She's really ours now," Rebecca said as they left the courthouse with their daughter. "No one can ever take her away from us again." Lucas looked at Maria, who was now walking and calling him Daddy, with the innocent trust of a child who had never known anything but love and security. "She was always ours," he said. "From the moment you walked into my life, we were a family." The Broken Arrow Ranch prospered under their joint management, with Rebecca's business skills complementing Lucas's ranching expertise. They expanded the operation, adding new cattle and improving the facilities, while always maintaining the values of hard work and integrity that had brought them together. Maria grew up surrounded by the love of two parents who had chosen each other and chosen her, creating the kind of stable family environment that neither Lucas nor Rebecca had experienced in their own childhoods. She was a bright and happy child who loved the ranch life and showed early signs of inheriting her parents' work ethic and compassion for others. "She's going to be something special," Lucas said one evening as they watched 3-year-old Maria help feed the calves with the serious concentration of a child who took her responsibilities seriously. Rebecca smiled as she watched their daughter. "She already is something special," she said. "She's the reason we found each other, and she's the heart of everything we've built here." The ranch became known throughout the region not just for its successful cattle operation, but for the family values that Lucas and Rebecca embodied. They employed several other families over the years, always treating their workers with the same respect and fairness that had characterized their own relationship from the beginning. Lucas never forgot the lessons he had learned about the importance of family and the power of unconditional love. He and Rebecca established a fund to help other single mothers in crisis, providing temporary housing and employment opportunities for women who found themselves in situations similar to Rebecca's desperate arrival at the ranch. "Everyone deserves a chance to build something better," Lucas would tell the women they helped. "Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to believe in you when you can't believe in yourself." The legacy. 20 years after Rebecca Martinez first appeared at the Broken Arrow Ranch carrying a sick baby and desperate for help, Lucas Bennett stood on the same porch where he had first heard her plea for assistance. The ranch had grown and prospered beyond anything he could have imagined, but more importantly, it had become the foundation for a family legacy that would endure for generations. Maria Bennett, now a college graduate with a degree in veterinary medicine, had returned to the ranch to help manage the operation and to carry on the family tradition of helping others in need. She had inherited her parents' compassion and work ethic, along with a deep understanding of what it meant to be part of a family that had been forged through choice rather than blood. "Dad, the new family arrived this morning," Maria told Lucas as she joined him on the porch. "The mother has 2 children, and they've been living in their car for a week. I put them in the guest cabin and told them they could stay as long as they needed." Lucas smiled at his daughter's automatic response to help people in crisis. Over the years, the ranch had become an unofficial refuge for families in transition, providing temporary housing and employment opportunities for people who needed a second chance. "Your mother would be proud," Lucas said, thinking of Rebecca, who had passed away 2 years earlier after a brief illness. Her death had been devastating for Lucas and Maria, but it had also strengthened their bond and their commitment to continuing the work she had started. The Broken Arrow Ranch now employed 15 families and covered 12,000 acres, making it one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. But Lucas measured success not just in terms of cattle and profits, but in terms of the lives that had been changed and the families that had been helped over the years. "I've been thinking about expanding the program," Maria said. "Maybe partnering with some social service agencies to provide more structured support for families in crisis." Lucas nodded approvingly. "Your mother always said that success meant nothing if you didn't use it to help others," he said. "I think she would love the idea of making our help more organized and effective." And as they talked, Lucas reflected on the journey that had brought him from a lonely ranch foreman to the patriarch of a family that had touched hundreds of lives. It had all started with a simple decision to help a desperate woman and her baby, but it had grown into something far more significant. The story of Lucas and Rebecca Bennett had become part of Wyoming folklore, told in schools and community centers as an example of how ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they opened their hearts to others. Their ranch had become a symbol of hope and redemption for families throughout the region. But for Lucas, the most important legacy was not the stories or the recognition, but the knowledge that he had helped create a world where vulnerable people had advocates and protectors. The loneliness that had once defined his life had been replaced by the richness of family connections and community involvement. As the sun set over the Wind River Valley, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Lucas thought about the young woman who had appeared at his door 20 years earlier, crying that she had no one else to turn to. He had given her and Maria a family, but in return they had given him something even more precious, the knowledge that love could transform even the most solitary heart. The Wyoming landscape stretched endlessly toward the horizon, just as it had on that bitter February morning when Rebecca had first sought his help. But everything else had changed, transformed by the power of unconditional love and the courage to open one's heart to strangers who became family. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful journey of love, family, and second chances. If this story of a lonely cowboy who found his purpose in helping others moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Don't forget to comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our viewers around the world.